I'm Mara Freeman. I'm here to talk about my book Grail Alchemy. I'm a teacher and I'm a writer of the Celtic and British mystery tradition. I'm also the director of a 3-grade mystery school, the Avalon Mystery School. And this is something that I've been doing for many, many years, and I'm happy to share it all with you today, or some of it with you today. So about my book then. I guess I'll start with why I wrote Grail Alchemy. I wrote it because I've been teaching in this magical stream of tradition for probably over 30 years. And that's because I believe that the Grail teachings are probably one of the most clear and comprehensive mystery teachings that can lead us to spiritual illumination in the West today. So although, this is an ancient tradition, I think it's really, a precious vestige of what was once a very ancient and very easy to follow spiritual path that kind of went underground for many, many years. And, at this time when everything's emerging into the light of day, it's something that we can really work with, and it has its resonances with many others of the Western mysteries, with the Kabbalah, with the interior castles of Teresa of Avila, and especially with alchemy too. So the Grail takes its place in the centre, in the heart of the Western mystery tradition. And of course I'm not alone in thinking this. For instance, we have the 20th century magician W.G. Gray, Bill Gray. He said the story of the Grail is the story of Western inner tradition. We have Joseph Campbell, great mythologist, and Joseph Campbell said of the Grail, it is the founding myth of Western civilization. So a lot of thinkers, a lot of writers have really sort of recognised the power of the Grail. And it's something, as I said, that we can work with today, as long as we rescue it from some of the crazy stuff that has got attached to it over the centuries. And the truth is that the teachings of the Grail, the wisdom of the Holy Grail, is hidden in plain sight, if you will, in the stories themselves. We don't have to look for conspiracy theories, we don't have to get into contorted ideas that the Grail is about Mary Magdalene, or it's about, some bloodline, or any of those theories that were around in the 1980s and have since been debunked. That's not what the Grail is about. The Grail is a precious vessel, and as such it really has a very sort of ancient lineage from the cauldron of the goddess herself. And it came into the Middle Ages through the Celtic bards and the troubadours, and of course into the whole Arthurian legend, which is where most of the stories were written. So I thought we'd just sort of take a little look at that story, how it came about, how the Grail quest fits in to the Arthurian tradition. So I'm sure many of you have read about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and Merlin and so on. And the stories fall into two parts. The first part of the Arthurian mythos is all about the sword. It's all about King Arthur and the Fellowship of the Round Table, all the knights sort of going out there, fighting all the enemies and creating law and order in the land of Britain. And when they've done all that, well, there's nothing much more for them to do. And so the sword has to be balanced up with the Grail. It's like the masculine, the yang, the sword. The outer adventure gives way to the inner adventure, the yin, the feminine, the search for this magical vessel that's hard to attain. And as such, it is a very inner journey. In fact, there's kind of a resonance here with the passage of the lives of many of us, in that, it's the first half of our lives in which we go out and we fight the dragons and we, win our spurs and maybe we get crowned and all the rest of it. And then it's at midlife that we decide that, well, we've conquered everything we really want to conquer. Is the outer world and all its prizes that important? Maybe it's time to go within and seek the soul and what our true essence, our immortal part of ourselves, can really give us in terms of treasures. And that's when that midlife journey begins for that spiritual quest. And so The Grail appears when all the knights are sitting around the round table in Camelot, and the knights have this absolutely slap-bang amazing vision. They have, lights, and they have claps of thunder, and they have this, beautiful jewel-encrusted vessel. It comes around, it gives them everything they want to eat and drink. And one really beautiful thing about this vision is that they each see the other person, their brother knights, as more beautiful and more glorious than ever before. So it's as if their whole perception of each other and themselves has completely changed with this vision of the Grail. It's as if they are now able to see the divine spark within all human beings. And so the Grail sort of disappears off, it wafts away, and they're told that it's hidden in some castle, and of course everyone's fired with this great urgency, this great excitement that this is the next great adventure, is to find the hidden castle of the Holy Grail, and that's where they all head off. And it's interesting because it's at this point in the Arthurian mythos that the Fellowship of the Round Table kind of falls apart. It's never a whole unified fighting unit again. And poor old King Arthur's sort of left behind, really, twiddling his thumbs a bit, because it's all about the Grail Knights now and what they seek. And they all go off on their own, because the Grail quest, being ultimately a quest for the individual soul and spirit, is an individual quest. It's about, finding your own way through the forest, fighting your own dragons, and, achieving something that is an experiential experience that no one else can really tell you about or do for you. And you're not answerable to any outer authority or conventional society. So they don't really care what King Arthur thinks about it. They're no longer sort of focused on him. They're focused on their own spiritual quest. And no more is this perhaps more clearly shown than in the story of Percival. Percival, or Le Comte du Grail, that was written in the 12th century Chrétien de Troyes in France. Amazing story. The whole story is about an initiation. It tells how Percival is this young fool. He grows up in a forest away from civilization when he's young. He's never seen any knights because his mother's keeping him away from the big violent outside world, because that's how she lost her other sons and her husband. But Percival has his own vision. He comes across the knights of King Arthur's court, all dressed in their amazing silver shining armour. He thinks they're angels in the forest. And they say, no, we're knights of the Round Table. We have, we pay allegiance to King Arthur, and that's what he wants to be. He wants to go off to Camelot. He wants to become a knight himself. So off he goes, abandoning his poor old mum, who sort of falls down in a faint on the bridge, and he goes off to Camelot. Well, I won't tell the whole story, but you can read about it if you like. Goes through lots of adventures, trials and tribulations, and learns to be, a pretty good knight. But the real story of initiation begins when Percival kind of decides it's maybe time to go back and see if Mum's all right. And he is going back to the forest. He's looking for his mum somewhere. He sort of has this inkling something's maybe not quite right. And that's when he comes upon, he steps into this magical world. He steps into the other world, this mysterious castle in a valley, and he goes into the castle, and there is the wounded knight, the Fisher King, lying very injured from this mysterious wound in this extraordinary temple room. And this is, one of the things that tells us that the Grail quest isn't really anything to do with the medieval church. All these stories, Percival's just one of them, about the Grail. It's never kept in a church. It's always in a castle. The castle of wonders, the castle of maidens, the chessboard castle, the castle of adventure. All these amazing castles are really otherworldly temples. They're way stations in the inner landscape of the Celtic and British otherworld. And it's very clear to see this when Percival has this, feast with the Fisher King. The king is sitting in his temple. It's square. It's said that it will hold 400 knights. Everything's about the number 4. There's 4 pillars in the centre holding up a bronze mantle with a great fire in the middle, rather like an altar. And it's at this altar that this extraordinary procession comes through. And the procession, well, this is where we get into the four hallows of the Grail. Percival is presented with a sword, and then the procession comes by with a young man carrying a bleeding lance, and then he's followed by two other young men carrying candelabra with 10 candles each, just like the menorah, the 10 stations in the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic tree of life, we might add there. And then they're followed by a beautiful woman holding the Grail. And behind her is another woman with a silver carving dish. And so we have the four symbols that show up in all the branches of Western mystery tradition ever after. The sword, the spear, the cup, and the platter or the stone. We find them in the four hallows of the tarot cards, of course, and the four tools used in all magical orders ever since, down through the Golden Dawn and onwards. And, if that wasn't enough, we have the beautiful maiden, the Grail maiden, the goddess. She appears in all the Grail stories. She is the Grail bearer. And she appears as in one of the stories, she's called, got this beautiful name, she's called Knowledge of Joy, or Overflowing with Joy, or Remembrance of Joy. And she's shining with this glorious light, and she's the embodiment of the goddess that shows us the bliss of the soul. But Percival, of course, he doesn't ask the ritual question that will get him the Grail at the castle of the Fisher King and will heal the wounded king. So he kind of gets really ousted out of the castle. And then when he wanders very bereft and bewildered, not knowing what's going on, but feeling very sort of spiritually empty in the forest, then he gets met by the other face of the goddess, the dark goddess, the ugly old hag who berates him for not asking the ritual question that would have healed the king. So all this is sort of, hints of a ceremonial tradition, lost in the mists of time, a lot of Christian overlay, but nevertheless nothing really to do with the church. In fact, how these stories got through this, time of great repression in the 12th century onwards, and didn't get censored by the Catholic Church is really, quite extraordinary. It makes me marvel how it actually did get through. And from that point on, that's when it really does come into the Western mystery tradition to its very heart. The whole alchemical piece, one of the stories about the Grail is that Joseph of Arimathea brought the Grail into England from the Holy Land. It's two vessels, one red and one white. Now the Christian overlay is that the red vessel is Christ's blood and the white vessel is the fluid, all of these that Joseph collected when Christ was hanging from the cross. But if you look a little bit deeper into it and all the stories surrounding the Glastonbury Grail and Joseph, we're talking alchemy here. We're talking about the fluids, the red and the white, the sulphur and the mercury that was to make the philosopher's stone, which would transmute lead into gold. Sometimes they're called the Red King and the White Queen, or the red is the sun and the white is the moon. But a lot of alchemical symbolism in the Grail there. And again, it's not about necessarily turning the metal of lead into the precious, wealthy material metal of gold, because the alchemists believed that you had to work on all levels of your being. And so, although they did a lot of work in the laboratory with this, chemical substances, this was also about turning the lead of the ego into the gold of spirit. So again, we have this, the mystery version, the alchemical version of the Grail in Joseph's story too. And then, to take us up to modern times, all the mystery orders have worked with the Grail. I think probably one of the people that worked with it most was Dion Fortune, and she actually created a church of the Grail, using its other name, Grail. And her aim, this was, in the middle of the 20th century, what she wanted to do was to kind of re-establish the ancient Celtic church that she believed Joseph of Arimathea had come to Glastonbury to do. And she created a magical order where there were 3 grades of the seekers, the servers, and the watchers. I should say it's a branch of her magical order. It's called the Church of the Grail, or other names too, won't go into that now. But she did some incredible stuff with the whole Grail teaching. She had people gather in a temple where she officiated a kind of mystic Eucharist, where the Grail was seen as everybody formulated through visualization a Grail that was streaming down the power of the Spirit onto all gathered there, and then sent it to the community and everyone around. She had her initiates, or would-be initiates, had to climb a sacred mountain on the inner plains, of course, where they came to a circle of standing stones on top of Glastonbury Tor, the Grail Chapel, and this mysterious cowled figure called the Watcher on top. I mean, it's really heady stuff, and if you read about how she really worked experientially with the Grail mysteries, it gives us today a really good idea of how we can take those within. The tarot card? Yeah. Yeah, well, I think the most well-known image of the Ace of Cups comes from the Rider-Waite Tarot, doesn't it? And A.E. Waite was very much, he was very instrumental in bringing the tarot, through the Golden Dawn into the modern world, 20th century world anyway. And actually it was Waite. There's kind of different stories about this. Some say it was Waite, some say it was W.B. Yeats. I think it was both of them ultimately. No one knows quite who was first, who decided that, it was the four tarot, the four Grail Hallows should be the four tarot suits. So when he designed that iconic card of the cup and the dove and the host, the wafer of the mass, coming into it, that's what he had in mind. Probably the more Christianized versions of the Grail, which were the later Grail stories. The earlier ones were a little bit more pagan, but because he was a very devout Catholic himself, as well as being a Freemason and a member of the Golden Dawn, this was seen directly as the dove of Christ, bringing the wafer of the Mass, which interestingly enough is, the circle with the Celtic cross in the middle, down into the cup. And then there's all that beautiful water imagery, which is very feminine, because of course you've got all these resonances with the cup, the sacred wells of wisdom, the ocean, and all of that too.
Sometimes it's cold.
Sorry?
Sometimes it's cold and it's water and other colours.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like all the aces, at least in the old tarot decks, there's the golden sparks of the yods, the little kind of golden sparkles of spirit coming down as well into the cup and just around. Yeah, one of my favourite cards. Yeah. I used to practice as a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist, and so when I was training to do that, I realised there's kind of two ways in which it's used. There's the hypnosis where you put somebody under and you give them lots of suggestions to give up smoking or whatever, and then there's hypnotherapy, which is more what I did, which is very similar to magical work, where you take people down into a deep state of relaxation, but not to inculcate them with suggestions, but to allow them to take their own journey through their own inner landscape, and meet up with what might be called sub-personalities or archetypes, so that they could make changes in their lives from that deeper level. It's not very different from magical work, because if you do hypnotherapy, you're taking someone into an altered state of consciousness to look at their own personal subconscious. But you can also use that method to take yourself or anyone else down, but beyond the personal, into the world of spirit, the other world, the inner planes, the astral level, whatever you like to call it. It started off in one direction and then it ended up in another. I was going to write a book about Avalon, and I realised it was going to take too much from the Avalon Mystery School material. And I actually got a lot of inner guidance and a tarot reading that said very clearly that I was to write the book on the Grail. I was like, oh no, a million other people have written books on the Grail. And it's very, you're not just sort of researching one kind of text or narrative, so many different medieval texts on the Grail. So it was quite a slog from that point of view. I was doing a lot of other things in between. I also have a company that takes people around sacred sites through the British Isles and Ireland, so that was taking up a lot of my time. So I lived in California. I moved back here in 2007, and I think I started the Grail Book in about 2008, and it was finished in 2011, so 3 or 4 years maybe. Yeah. So what I do is I create a Grail chapel, and I do that either by myself or with a group of other people. And a lot of, when, especially of course, as you probably know, when you have a lot of people, then the energy, the spirit really comes in very, very strongly, and it's very powerful. So yeah, that ritual is actually given in the last chapter of the Grail Book. So.